Hello. This is going to be my review of the 2025 Higher Level Maths Paper 2 that just happened this morning. Now, it did take a while for this paper to come online, so I don't have access to a physical copy of it. So I just had to wait for the online version to be uploaded. And here it is, and I'm going to give my review on it. Now, I had a quick squiz at the paper, and it looked pretty challenging, so I'm going to give individual reviews on the questions right now. Oh, apologies there. Don't know why that's coming off. Wow, in the middle of a review? Okay, whatever. Right. So question 1, standard equation of a line stuff. We have a point on a line and working out an acute angle between two lines. That's all okay. And then a bit of an interesting question involving a slope of a line forming a triangle with a size unit. So you know a question's difficult when they include this section where it may be useful to draw a diagram. So a bit of an intriguing question there. Then we move on to a fairly standard circles question. So finding the center and radius, finding an equation of a tangent, that's all okay. And then we have this question involving just a horizontal line being tangent. Okay, question 3, Venn diagrams question finally came up after a long time essentially not having one appear on the course. So some standard probability, justifying whether events are dependent or independent of each other. So that's a common thing normally asked in these probability questions, so you should have no bother with solving them. And then a probability question involving this Venn diagram, so fairly standard. Now, question 4 is a bit of an oddball, involving measures of spread and the 3 averages as well as quartiles, and then a nice little theory question involving what happens if one data point is changed. So overall, a lot of thinking in that question, but manageable, I would think. And then we have a frequency distribution. So again, not really something I know a lot of students pay a lot of attention to because it hasn't come up in quite some time, but it should be one you should have no bother with. They even kind of gave you a hint using a thing called the mid-interval rule, essentially just picking the middle of each interval and using that as your average value per se. Question 5, standard. This is a fairly simple geometry question here. And then enlargements came up, which I thought was a bit of a surprise because as far as I remember, I hadn't seen it come up in the higher level paper. It definitely came up in the ordinary paper a good few times, but not in the higher paper. But still, it should be one that is fairly straightforward. You just have to remember how the scaling factor scales. It's a mouthful of a sentence when it's to do with areas instead of lines. And then, just another enlargements one there. Okay, question 6. In fairness, this question looked okay at a first glance, but you actually were told to find 6 solutions within this range. So a bit of a odd one there. But with a simple equation, they'd expect to do something weird with the domain. And then part B involved, weirdly enough, a modulus inside of trigonometric function. But again, should be relatively straightforward for people. And then a cosine rule, they even tell you to use it in case you were confused about what to do there. Okay, now for the short questions, oddballs, yes, but oddballs that students should be able to get right. Usually, I tell my students just to stare at a question for about a minute and see if anything comes up, and then if nothing happens within about a minute, just try something. Try the closest thing you have in your thoughts. Go down that rabbit hole, and if it doesn't lead to anything, just try again. So, yeah, I'll give my full review at the end, because I'm not going to be reviewing section by section anymore. Right, now question 7. How do you use a ruler for this stuff? Now, I'm going to find this quite annoying because tomorrow I plan to go through this, but I'm not sure how I meant to do this specifically. So I might actually just skip these questions because you can actually do them without these parts here, because this starts at a part B, so it assumes that all of the stuff from before we can just essentially forget. So that's a fairly standard one. And then we have this bit of a weird region question involving coordinate geometry of the circle and a little bit of perspective type stuff. Yeah, just again, fairly standard coordinate geometry stuff here. It's just the weird perspective type stuff. So you really have to be good at kind of visualizing this weird 3D thing, I'd imagine. Well, actually, no, I'm misreading things. I misread this kind of initially, but no, it's just this section here, so apologies there. But it still requires some visualization regardless. Now, question 8, finding something in relation to a pyramid, and they give you kind of the initial steps of finding whatever it was. But no, they had you create a net afterwards, which I think was a thing that came up in 2023 for the first time, and I'm not sure whether still including that, but it did say construct, so all the measurements from here are necessary here. So again, another question I can't really go through in a lot of detail. And then percentage error. So commonly associated with a trapezoidal rule, so you should have experience dealing with percentage errors. And then finding heights of a round tower with certain measurements using the sine rule. That's again all fairly standard trig. Now, question 9 and question 10. These were questions that I have heard were quite difficult. And in fairness, after reading it, or at least giving a quick squiz of the paper, yeah. Now, a question like this has come up before. I think it was for like blood types or something. So someone with a particular blood type, and if they have a disease, I think. But a tree diagram like that has come up before. So something you should have at least a tiny bit of practice with. And then a couple of probability questions in relation to the tree diagram. Okay. B, more probability stuff. Just assuming a national average there, so ignoring the stuff from the tree diagram. And then this question. The pairing up of people I heard was quite difficult. And yeah, it's difficult to visualize how even I might go about doing this question. But if I sat and stared at it for a while, I'd probably get it. That's the kind of person I am. And then, yeah, just essentially another combinations question. Again, bringing in scientific notation. So, something students might have dealt with before. I know the physics people will definitely have dealt with scientific notation formally at leaving Cert. It is just a skill they've assumed you've taken up from junior Cert. Right, question 10. Now, the empirical rule. Bit odd that the empirical rule has come up on a higher level paper. Like, it is specified on the course, but that's not usually included for whatever reason, but I guess they've just included it here. Using the normal distribution, yeah, working at a value. And then we have 95% confidence interval, calculating p-values included, etc. So a fairly okay looking hypothesis test type question, although there wasn't well, it's a stated conclusion, so they've actually kind of split it over a couple of parts. And then a stratified random sample, so bringing in a definition here, which, again, I think is a bit of an odd move to include a definition in this, because it's usually just talking about the maths in general, not necessarily, especially statistical stuff. So, bit of an odd one there. And then that's just expected value question, so another fairly standard one there. Okay, so I know my review of this wasn't great, but that's because I misread some of the questions. But on further inspection, I do agree with the difficulty. I think this paper is a lot harder than paper 1. Like, there's no necessarily denying that. Was it any better in terms of the content and the question types? They're kind of equal in terms of the amount of questions that I felt were good and that any student could attempt versus the number of questions that were, like a bat out of hell type crazy. So I gave paper 1, I think it was either 7.5 or 8 out of 10. I would consider this ever so slightly lower. So I would think it's better than average. It's better than average paper, 100%. But in comparison to paper 1, I wouldn't consider it as good. So on that note, I'm going to give yeah, this is paper 1. I'm actually going to rechange my score to 8 out of 10 if it wasn't that already. And paper 2, I'm going to give 7.5 out of 10. Definitely room for improvement to ensure that every student has a fighting chance. But that's the SEC and the type of questions that they do. So we're just going to wait for the marking scheme to come out and see how everything is distributed. But other than that, if you don't do any other maths-based subjects, well, that's pretty much no more maths for you. But yeah, that's the last little maths paper you're ever going to do if you don't choose to pursue maths in the future. So best of luck with the rest of the exams, guys.